Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this incredible dialogue with the new Untouchables. This is our 57th episode. We are recording this on Friday, February 7th, Super Bowl weekend, 2026, and a whole lot more going on. We are joined once again, of course, by in the upper left hand corner on my screen, and sometimes it's a little confusing, so I apologize, but Lewis Clark, the executive director of the Government Accountability Project. Immediately to his right on my screen is Paul Peltier, the veteran of the Department of Justice and private practice, and also an adjunct professor at George Washington University. To my left is June Carbone, the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. Further to the right, the lower part of my screen is Mark Dan, the proprietor of Dan Law, former Attorney General of the state of Ohio. And then lastly, William K. Black, kind of a catch-all regulator, expert in law, regulation, and really all things corruption. And of course, the author of the book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. I will provide descriptions and links to their work below. But I want to kick things off with just kind of an overview of some of the crazy things that we're witnessing throughout really everything, as we have been since we started recording these things. And I'm going to share my screen, which will put a couple of images up that I think will be a great opportunity to start the dialogue. And the first thing that we see here, as it turns out, and this was shared to me from June Carbone. This is apparently an official Republican image, and only traitors help invaders. I think that certainly picture says 1,000 words. In addition to, of course, I think it complements and marries exactly what we're seeing here in the image, and I'm sure a lot of us saw it. I'll just play a brief amount of it, but this came directly from Truth Social.
I wouldn't play it. Don't play it.
Yeah, don't play it.
Yeah. And
I
then
wouldn't play it.
and then further to that, which was, obviously very unfortunate. But as we move into I thought this was, I usually like to share front page of the New York Times, but there's really so much to cover. I just wanted to kind of air this one. There was a guest essay in the New York Times this afternoon that I thought was or this morning, I should say. The finance industry is a grift. Let's start treating it that way. And it was written by Warren Cass, and this is the first time I've heard of him. Mr. Cass is a contributing opinion writer and the chief economist at American Compass, a conservative economic think tank, which I find intriguing, and writes a newsletter to Understand America. So to kick things off in the context of all things, of course, which is, overwhelmed the news cycle. Of course, all things Epstein revelations and the huge data dump last week, 3 million pieces of data that have just been more and more intriguing. And I just want to add in, for me, it seems like it's either complete incompetence, a lot of the things that came through, or potentially something else. And I look forward to seeing if maybe somebody addresses that. And then further, earlier this week, I had the wonderful opportunity to do a breakout session with June Carbone, who really laid out a lot of incredible questions about what we're not asking about the Epstein investigation that I hope we can cover, as well as additionally Mark Dan, who took a snippet from one of our truth bombs and laid it out on TikTok and was ultimately canceled by just simply stating what he had here, that people should inundate and call the Hennifer County prosecutor to demand indictments in the murder of course, Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good. So on that note, I'm going to ask you, June, to maybe react and take us forward for what's on your mind.
So I find this week more than other weeks overwhelming. And let me start, therefore, on a personal note. Bill and I went to the Democratic caucuses this week. There are a variety of state elections that are up. The only binding vote was for governor, but Bill ran for delegate, and he got up and was incredibly self-effacing and effective in focusing on white-collar corruption. And the audience cheered him on. It was spontaneous, it was powerful. The latest news on the Republican race for governor, for their gubernatorial primary, is that the person who seems to be pulling ahead is a sportscaster who is emphasizing corruption. Of course, that means in this context, Somali corruption, but still emphasizing corruption and distancing herself ever so slightly from ICE. And that's a sign, I think, of where we're going. We have had, of course, the plunge in crypto, hardly a surprise. But I want to emphasize on finance. Sali Amarova had been Biden's candidate to head the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. She was denounced as a communist. Of course, why is she in the United States? Because her parents fled communism to be in the United States. And the real reason, of course, they didn't confirm her is her views. And she had a wonderful piece in which she laid out this part of the financial system, part of the financial system that does loans, like mortgage loans, and hedges, uh, should exist. It performs a valuable function. Almost everything above that, the credit default swaps and our arcane financial instruments that were at the core of the financial crisis, and that continue today in a variety of forms, has no reason to exist. It really doesn't serve anyone. All it exists for, it's like gambling. It's there. It makes people a lot of money. It allows insiders to cash in, but it doesn't provide a service necessary to the economy. These are radical views. I read it and I thought, yeah, I had that instinct somewhere, but I lack the expertise to express it. I think we're beginning to see a softening in some of what is going on, which is unregulated financial systems inevitably crash and burn, and pockets, at least, of the financial system like crypto. And like a good part of what's going on with AI, crypto is not tethered to anything real. It is like, gambling. And the AI investment is tethered to something real, but it is about a contest between bros as to who gets to be the dominant player. I'm betting Google wins. But that means a number of both the runner-ups and the people financing them, more importantly, may crash at some point, and we have no way of knowing when or whether it will spread a contagion throughout the financial system. We got some things about that this week. Epstein. Epstein. I mean, Epstein mushrooms. Every day I look and people are putting together the dots in the variety of things that have been released. One thing is clear, they made some effort to scrub references to Trump. They didn't always succeed. They put something up they promptly took down. But the story we don't have is the backstory. Apparently, Ghislaine Maxwell is going to testify this week. She's going to testify about people who settled civil suits. And the Justice Department knows who they are. Those names have not been released. But her pitch is going to be, hey, there are these people. Presumably, she is going to release names Trump wants released. And if they got off, why should I be the only one who's convicted of anything? Poor old me. Now, what we're seeing in the rest of the files, and this is what I emphasize, and let me add, there's a little bit more since we spoke on Monday. I emphasize that then we don't know the story of what prosecutors did and didn't do. We know these kinds of cases are hard to bring. That is, and you see it in some of the files. Some of the most salacious and explosive allegations are by people not deemed credible. And then we discuss, I mean, among the absolutely disgusting things are Epstein talking about how, apparently being in the act of selling babies, but allegations of children adopted who were raised for the purpose of sexual exploitation, and Epstein commenting those people do unbelievable things. Why? Because if they were sexually traumatized from a fairly early age on, they are more pliable than people with ordinary upbringings. And there may be a grooming that started in infancy for some people. Those people, deeply traumatized, living absolutely incredible lives, are the people most likely to be deemed unbelievable by the FBI without incredible correlation, which Epstein fought tooth and nail. And so, one of the big things we don't know, aside from what Justice Department did and didn't do, who they investigated, who they did not, whether there was more there they found credible, but too difficult to get a conviction. Because after all, a credible Justice Department doesn't bring cases unless they can win by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And sex cases that involve individual victims are very hard to get convictions on, especially against reputable men. So we don't know that. But the other piece is the cover up. Epstein apparently had a machine to cover up, to threaten people who dared go to the FBI. I view the most explosive allegations now is that women died, girls died, and were buried, perhaps on property Donald Trump owns. Those are the allegations. We don't have proof. But certainly even more certain evidence that Epstein threatened people who dared think about going to the FBI. You will end up like those other people, other girls who disappeared. There are numerous emails with those kinds of allegations. We don't have the whole story together. And we know that Donald Trump consistently, sometimes involving Michael Cohen, threatened and continues to threaten to this day anybody who, challenges him or suggests they're going to the police or suggests they're going to the press or simply engages in a demonstration in public that isn't about him at all. Those people are consistently threatened. Are Donald Trump's fingerprints on any of the threats against people engaged in sexual activity together with or separately from Epstein? We know there are women who have alleged that Trump raped them when they were underage. And we know that the one woman who brought a lawsuit in 2016 was threatened so severely she withdrew the lawsuit. But we don't know much about other forms of threats or whether they were acted on or who is involved in executing. We don't know. So I want to suggest that the level of corruption involved in all of this, and that, the latest rumors that Epstein is connected to Russian intelligence, that Epstein is plotting with various people around the world to rig various financial transactions, that Epstein, was talking with people from jail about his role in the financial crisis. I mean, the level of corruption, conspiracies, threats, and absolutely disgusting financial conduct is off the boards. The one I was reading this morning was apparently by a Harvard professor saying, I'm relieved that the girl I was having sex with at Epstein's dinner party didn't die. These are chilling allegations. And again, we don't have a comprehensive view. Which ones are credible, which ones are not, which were investigated, which were not, and whether today there is anything we can do about it. The thing that is happening, though, before our very eyes is that some people's names are being dragged through the mud, and some, at least one, has been forced to resign or been fired this week, and certainly with more consequences in the UK than here. But how many people's names haven't been released because they're Donald Trump or Donald Trump's friends? He said to Marjorie Taylor Greene, His friends were all in these files and he was worried about them. Who's being protected and who is deliberately being thrown to the wolves because it serves political ends? And finally, I would note that what we have to start thinking about are efforts to steal the election. Now, the law review article I did on legal civil war, playing out the scenarios written before the election, one of the big scenarios is that Congress has the ability, I mean, a way you can steal an election is you contest various seats. And the process of dealing with the allegations and et cetera, even if they're frivolous, takes a while. And then Congress says, oh, there are these doubts about the outcome of these elections. We won't seat the elected representative. And we know Mike Johnson is willing to do virtually anything. We don't know if he can hold his caucus through to such a vote. But the fact that they're gearing up to intimidate voters, to throw smoke, to possibly steal the election is a very real possibility. And let me say the thing that ties this all together, I talked to a psychologist this morning. He said, you can't tell whether Trump is losing it because of dementia or is simply doing what he has always done. He is a narcissist to the level of a diagnosis as a psychotic narcissist. And what that means is that he is hollow inside. He lives for the temporary, dopamine hit that comes with something that caters to his ego. And that lasts a few days, and then he is looking for the next hit. It is what he lives for. And it is clear that the imposition of his will, then getting his name on Penn Station or Dulles Airport, or building himself an arch, or taking over the Kennedy Center, or using the East Wing as a monument to his vanity, that these projects are relatively harmful. If I were the mayor of New York, I'd say yes. Why? Because he's busy not spending infrastructure funds or disaster funds or sending FEMA to blue states at all. 100% with almost no publicity, and then doing a bad job where he's sending some money to red states. Yeah, if I were the mayor of New York, I'd say, fine, go ahead and name it. And the moment it's built and we have the funds, we will rename it. That's what you do with somebody who's living every day in terms of flatter me and I will give you riches. Don't flatter me and I will destroy you. And in the meantime, selling chips that are the height of US national security concerns to somebody in the Middle East who's going to give them to the Chinese, and making almost no pretense about the fact he's taking in vast amounts of money to which he thinks he's entitled as our narcissist in chief.
Wow, thank you for that, June. Bill, several things. I'm so happy you had the opportunity to get the reaction in person based on delivering, this sort of context of, the fraud and financialization and everything else that married to, what we've been doing forever, not to mention what was on the front page of the New York Times, but to what June just mentioned, also as it relates to the Epstein files. And I know this is what you teach now at the University of Minnesota as well. Amongst all of these other incredible revelations in the Epstein files, of which I do want to note that it was interesting to me that the New York Times said that Trump was mentioned over 5,000 times. And Midas Touch Network has reported it's over 38,000 times as of maybe an hour before this recording. But one of the things that caught my ear earlier today was these revelations that Epstein was super dialed into Peter Thiel, was invested a $40 million directly into some sort of variation that became a partnership, I believe, with another high-tech outfit, but it was also involved with crypto, as I understand it. Wherever you want to pick up and go, but boy, there's a lot going on at the moment.
Okay, so let's start out with some really basic things from criminology that have been proven big time, in particular over the last several weeks. One, audacity is vastly more important than intelligence. Just think of the outrageousness of suing the United States of America if you're the president of the United States of America for, $10 billion, 10 trillion, he can make up any number he wants. And then having the Secretary of the Treasury say, oh, well, I won't make a decision on that. That's the Justice Department's decision. So you got a whole panel of lawyers. Um, Lawyers don't make the substantive decision. We're attorneys for clients. The client is the United States of America and the Department of the Treasury. So the Secretary of the Treasury makes the decision, not the Justice Department, on whether you're going to pay the president this incredible ripoff in just public space, right? Second huge thing, it is mind-bogglingly more damaging when the crook is an elite CEO or the head of state or C, all of the above. The losses don't go just, sort of like this up the chain. It's more like the CEOs are off the charts. And the CEO who's president, breaks all of those things. They can cause more damage. And it isn't just the money they steal that causes the damage. They always distort and ruin the economies and ethics and how an industry works. And that causes even greater losses than the amount of money that goes to them. Because when you screw up things like, for example, crypto, or if you screw up even more generally, our old friend from the great financial crisis, what did economists say was the best possible place in finance? The one we didn't have to worry about because it didn't have any of that damn public interference from federal deposit insurance and therefore would be regulated by the market super effectively. That'd be the shadow financial sector. And that's called the shadow financial sector because there's no effective regulation, right? And that was the absolute epicenter of the great financial crisis. Well, guess what's back and rising to an estimated $2 trillion? It's precisely that sector. And there is no meaningful regulation. There's no meaningful regulation at the federal level. There's no meaningful regulation this time around at the state level either. Now, by the way, that's something Democratic AGs can do something about. And we've got one of the world's experts on that. But he can also tell you about bandwidth and how focused and how, in some sense, small you can do it as a state AG compared to what Paul was able to do or Paul's predecessors in my era working with us were able to do, right? Which is then numbered in the thousands of elites that end up in prison. Right? Further stuff from criminology. Here's a shock. Guys commit many more crimes than gals. Right? It isn't because women are incapable of it. We can all give examples of women as criminals, but in every society we know of, men are vastly more likely to commit crimes. And even when the women commit the crimes, it's often in sort of this weird lieutenant, sometimes sexual role if they end up in big time crime. There are studies, for example, of stuff that Paul knows, in particular, the Enron era. There were virtually no prosecutions of elite women because they basically, were rounding error in terms of the Enron era fraud schemes. There's a
They were the
study.
they were the whistleblowers, Bill.
Yes, yes. And then that, Lewis and I and others can do that riff as well. This makes whistleblowers, and in particular, it makes high-level whistleblowers incredibly valuable. And I've talked about many times how the U.S. is blessed with more whistleblowers, particularly at high levels, than the rest of the world combined. But none of them are used by the current administration. They have a war against the whistleblowers. They're producing whistleblowers at an enormous rate because of the types of things they do, and that's part of the Minnesota story as well. What else do we know for criminology? Guys really like power and they really, really like money, but a whole bunch of them also really like sex. And sex with people that aren't their spouses, and often sex with underage people, and often sex that is actually rape, right? This is a subset of people. It's not everybody in these ranks. And it isn't limited to straights. You know, Peter Thiels and such of the world. I have no idea what they do or do not do, but there's not a thing where gays don't commit, gay males don't commit sexual crimes. They do, right? And this kind of access is really important. Now, I'll end on this. And again, we're all expert in this. We often, if we're thinking prosecution, are thinking conspiracy. And that is has a very different definition and how we go about proving it than the general public talks about. But I'm here to tell you, if one of the immense advantages of being the CEO as the crook or the head of state as the crook is you don't have to conspire. You just form networks, predatory networks, right? Nobody ever had to sit down in the run-up to the great financial crisis with the heads of the three credit rating agencies in the world and say, hey, we got this crap, right? 90% fraud incidents, liar's loans. And we're going to put it together and you're going to call it AAA, the best possible lowest risk category. And to do that, we're going to pay you more money. Now, and then you would take an overt act in fulfillment of that, giving a clean opinion, and that would be just a lockdown conspiracy. Those discussions don't occur. And they don't occur because there's no need to. There are only three credit rating agencies of global importance. Every single one of the partners that control them know if I don't give AAA, they'll go to the other two. I won't stop anything bad from happening. I'll just cut myself out of literally the most lucrative revenue stream ever in my profession, where profession is doing a lot of work, scare quotes, right? What's different about the CEO? I can signal, I can incentivize without ever saying the magic words that send anybody to prison for a conspiracy. I just make it in our mutual self-interest that you provide a clean opinion. And at the top, and this is a real key in dealing with Epstein as well, I make you richer, maybe a lot richer. I'm not penurious about, oh, I don't want to give him more than $10,000. Hey, you're making it possible for me to make literally billions of dollars. I am happy to kick off millions of dollars in fees to you. That's the genius of high finance criminals. So, sorry. That's news from the criminology front.
Wow. And Lewis, my goodness, we know that Bill has been inside this as well as Paul and Mark and yourself for a very long time. I mean, you're the Government Accountability Project is the premier conduit to whistleblowers within the Beltway and has been going back to the late 70s. And we're in this situation now, and it's been a couple of weeks since we've talked to you, but my mind is going to so many different potential arenas in which you might have some that can speak to some of these things. I don't want to lead you, but at the same time, I'm very curious how you respond to the dialogue so far.
Well, just to add another calamity to the to the dialogue today, Today, the government issued a final order setting up a new category for federal employees called policy career, at which essentially up to 1.5 million federal employees will now be the equivalent of political appointees. The announcement was that 50,000 people were being, 50,000 federal employees were being put into the category, this new category of policy career. However, the definition of that category fits up to 1.5 million federal employees out of 2 million. So essentially, up until this point, there would be only around, in the typical year, 3,000 federal employees in that category. Now they've just exploded it as of today, and
Which court? Which court?
this is the civil service system, the federal civil service system. So anyone who is a Title V employee can now be, or all they have to be is they either carry out policy or they develop policy or they're in some kind of confidential relationship to the, as a federal employee, some kind of confidential, activity. And then you will be qualified, you will qualify for this new category of federal employees. The fact that they said 50,000 people would be in this category is absolutely not right. 1.5 million qualify. Half the already President Trump tried to do this in the first administration, and the Pentagon said, so some person or some official there said that 50% of the civil service employees of the Defense Department would fit the category. OMB said that 80% of their employees would fit that category. The EPA said something like over half, including people who just do nothing but copy documents. They would also qualify to be in that category. And if this means that these people are they can be hired because of their loyalty to a political party or to a person, not the Constitution.
And
It's gotten
and
so
fired. Don't forget, Louis.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that means also they don't have whistleblower protection.
Was
The
that-
whistleblower protection will be transferred, so it's own. They can cite the whistleblower protections, and they can try to use whistleblower protection. That's if they blow the whistle. They can try, but the agency will be in charge of making the determination, not the civil service system, as now, as the situation is now.
Was that a ruling of a court today?
That was adopted by OMB.
Not the court.
And no, it's
Oh,
not.
okay,
No,
okay, all
we
right.
have a lawsuit.
Oh, okay.
We are plaintiffs in a lawsuit to overturn this decision. But that's where at least the effort is going, and the fact that there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, but it's mostly not understood the implications. But the implications means that our government is not going to be run by quality people. It'll be run by people who have political connections all the way through, not just the top, all the way through every agency of government. Then I guarantee you we will get a lot of whistleblowers because the government will cease being effective. They'll be run by people that essentially don't know what they're doing. And all you have to do is look at what's happening at the Department of Justice as they deal again with the Epstein files to see there's an enormous amount of incompetence that is now penetrating onto our consciousness about the new, let's say, the new direction of that particular agency. The releasing of 40 nude pictures of girls or women. The release of all these names of people when their big, their big mandate established by Congress is that the victims would not be identified. And of course, no, I would say that the the use of the scrubbing of the names of the potential or the people potential perpetrators I think that's probably a very conscious effort to essentially cover up for the elite. But I think a lot of the other mistakes, like the nude photographs, was a mistake out of incompetence. That's what we're going to see manifest throughout the government if if we don't win.
Paul, I mean, obviously a lot to react to there, but I just want to, maybe add also a couple of things that I recall earlier from reading. I believe that the Trump administration, at some point before all of these hostilities in Minneapolis, and tie two things together, I think they issued NDAs to those that were within ICE or maybe other arms of the U.S. military. And then also to that effect, earlier in this week, we saw the prosecutor in Minneapolis, I believe for ICE, basically throw herself at the mercy of the court saying, please arrest me so I can catch up on some sleep sort of thing, because they are overwhelmed and the whole thing is collapsing, I guess, in terms of the structure of being able to proceed with these cases. What are your thoughts coming out of what Lewis just said?
That's a great point, Patrick. We've been talking on this podcast since the beginning of this year, at least, on what impact this is having on the Department of Justice. And I think there's been no better evidence of how the department has just been hollowed out and ruined from that woman who threw herself at the mercy of the court that you just mentioned this week, who said, throw me in jail, hold me in contempt, I need sleep. And of course, the department, and think of a job that does that to you, that you would actually say that to a court as an officer of the court. Think of what's going on. Remember, this is upon the fact that Minneapolis lost about 15 prosecutors in a week period, and I think they're down under 30 now. And think about what that does to the Department of Justice, right? And let's talk about fraud. Let's talk about what June said, and let's talk about what Bill said. What Bill's talking about, what we're all talking about in terms of financial fraud. While it's not rocket science, you certainly have to have a level of experience and a level of guts and a level of know-how to prosecute these crimes effectively, right? And leadership is, of course, very important. But with the department being hollowed out, there is really no chance, zero chance, that any real effective fraud or elite crime is going to be prosecuted. Zero, unless they piss Trump off, then of course they'll be prosecuted tomorrow. But the reality is no fraud, no real sophisticated fraud, which are targeting the elite fraudsters, which hasn't been done in a while, is going to be prosecuted for a long time. This Department of Justice is much more worse shape. It's not even on life support anymore. I think it's dead. But the reality is, and I'm going to take a counterpoint to what June said. I think that while people talk about the fact that they don't like fraud, I don't think that they vote on fraud. I think that the reality is people will vote if they believe that they're in a shitty position financially and the people that they're voting for are stealing money. I don't think that they like that. And I think that grifting they don't like. And I think that can affect votes. But the fact that they're all committing fraud, and they are, I don't think moves voters. I don't. But I think that if they're doing poorly economically, which I think most people are now, particularly below a certain income level, and I think that then when they see the grifting that Trump is doing and all of his buddies and all his peers, I think that does move votes. So I mean, the great financial crisis did move votes over to Trump, I think. But that was a unique thing in American history. I think that prosecutors could forget about prosecuting fraud and it wouldn't really affect votes. At least that's my personal view. But I think the fact that the Department of Justice is now incapable of doing it, I wonder how that's going to resonate. But I certainly know and understand that people are talking about fraud now like they've never had before. But I think that what is impacting that on the Republican side is I think that they can blame minorities for committing fraud. And that is a little bit different. I mean, the Cato Institute in January, 2 weeks ago, came out with a study, and they're of course not liberals. They're conservatives and neocons and maybe even libertarians. But they came out with a study last week. Everybody should read it. And basically, they said immigrants commit fraud at a far less level than American citizens. Way, 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 way less. As a matter of fact, there's a chart that I saw in there where it showed fraud being committed by immigrants over the past 10 years has been going down, where fraud being committed by white American citizens has been skyrocketing. So, to talk to any Trumper or MAGA person, they're going to say that it's the immigrants that are committing fraud, which is completely false and completely wrong. So I don't know how you win that battle. I don't know how you win the fraud battle in terms of the electorate, but I certainly am not encouraged by the fact that the DOJ has depleted all of its valuable assets, and we've talked about this before. We had talked about the fact that it may take two generations to recover. It may even be longer, and I wish I had something better to say about that. But that's my response to you. That's my response to you.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. And Paul, pardon me. And Mark, to you, listen, you said to me earlier in the week, it was funny, just wind me up and just let me run. And I can only imagine where you could potentially go with all of the conversations thus far. But I want to address briefly, though, because you are on the front lines of consumer defense and people who are victims of fraud, particularly elderly people who are in the mortgage crisis and so on and so forth. And, what have we seen from Senator Chris Murphy this week? Another unraveling of Trump, pocketing hundreds of millions or his family within billions of transactions and selling AI secrets to, what maybe previous administrations would have considered enemies. But now it's like so muckety muck on every level. I mean, I just wound you up. Let's let it roll.
Well, yeah. I mean, look. I mean, this is the culmination of a 40-year campaign by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Lever's done just great reporting on this on the history of this of the what they call the master plan. By the way, it was not me at Russell Vought's house this week, threatening his life. Although I have to admit that has crossed my mind. But and as Lewis pointed out, the point person on the vulnerabilization of federal government employees is Russell Vought in the OMB. The point person for dismantling the regulatory state has been Vought, who not only served as the OMB director, but was simultaneously appointed director of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. I just signed another amicus brief on behalf of folks who represent consumers about the devastating changes that he put in gear at the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. He is quietly continuing the work that and effectively the work that Doge and Elon Musk so ham-handedly tried to do at the beginning of the administration. But that work has continued. It just has continued underground, and they are paying off those corporate supporters that supported them all the way through. And outside of Elizabeth Warren, there just aren't Democrats who are willing, apparently, to make the case that that's what's happening here. You can almost argue that all of the racist stuff, the theatrics of ICE and the immigration crackdown, the focus on quote unquote DEI protections for people who were historically disadvantaged is simply it's a distraction. It's there to keep people's attention away from what's really happening, which is, and at justice and at the Justice Department too, is that the financial world, the grifters in finance, as the New York Times op-ed pointed out today, and I think they were operating at way too high a level. These grifters in finance I mean, I now have a rash of clients I'm representing who have loans with these merchant cash advance companies, these who are allegedly buying receivables from small businesses but really giving them, payday lending, payday loan level, 200%, 300% interest rate loans to those businesses. They're not protecting small businesses anymore. There's nobody there. There's nobody left to do that, and there's nobody left to hold accountable these financial institutions. The entities that are holding and the ones that trouble Trump the most are the Federal Reserve, who he's constantly gone back to attack over and over again. The Federal Reserve is the only thing holding the banking community from all out warfare on their own customers. And those financial institutions, the modern equivalents are these fintech companies, are the modern equivalents of the liar's loan originators. Oh my God, I can't even. Bill, I can't even remember the name of the company in California with Mozilla and
Countrywide.
Countrywide and AmeriQuest and Washington, in Washington Mutual, and all the the equivalent now are these people who are loaning money against your next paycheck, the payday advance companies. And these mortgage cash advance companies now, literally offering usurious interest rate loans to small businesses. And while the mainstream banking community and I run a small business, so I understand this, ignore the needs of small businesses. And have no time or patience for the hard work it takes to underwrite and to service small loans to businesses in this country. And so that gap has been filled in by these unregulated businesses and its vote's intention and the intention of the master plan to make sure that whether it's environmental regulations, whether it's financial regulations, whether it's regulations of against fraud, that there is no infrastructure left at the end of these 4 years to be able to enforce that stuff. And just like the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota, it's going to take decades to rebuild these agencies, to replace this experience and expertise, to replace these 50,000 now more at will employees of federal government agencies that they're winding up to fire or drive out of town. They didn't care about the size of government or how much the spending is. They wanted to create an environment where people just said, fuck it, I've had enough, and are quitting their jobs in droves and leaving government service. People who have dedicated their life to doing the right thing, dedicated their life, whoever the president is, whoever's in front of them, to calling the balls and strikes and making those decisions. And it is tragic. And the AGs have, Patrick, to your point, have stepped in to some extent. Look, our Republican AG in Ohio brought an antitrust case today against cannabis companies for fixing prices. We recently legalized cannabis, and shockingly, these former criminals who are now legal cannabis dealers, are literally sitting around in a room and setting prices with each other. So we have the most expensive marijuana in the country. And apparently it's so lucrative to overcharge for marijuana that they don't care that right across the border in Michigan, they don't have the price fixing and the price of for and I learned this not from my kids and my employees, not from my personal experience because I'm just nobody would enjoy my company if I were using marijuana. But the fact, including myself, but the fact is that it's half the price 10 miles from Toledo in Temperance, Michigan, that it is in Ohio. There's a reason for that. And even a conservative Republican AG, is willing to step up and make that call and bring that case, and hopefully will bring down the price and access to what is now a legal commodity in the state of Ohio. But that is and other AGs are bringing those cases. There have been a series of cases against these payday, or they're called payday advance loans that are given out. I mean, they're just outrageous terms, outrageous fees. $5 to borrow $50 for a week kind of fee. I mean, just crazy 200-300% interest rates, and pretending that they're not loans. Just like the merchant cash advance, folks who are ripping off small businesses are pretending that they're purchasing receivables and not giving loans. But they get personal guarantees. And they require payments on an amortization schedule. And they have all, Paul, what do they used to say in the prosecution world? If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Likely a duck.
Yeah, right. So I mean, it's and state AGs have stepped up and started to do that. Not all of them, and that's one of the problems. And it was the same problem that we started all talking about together years ago, which is that the only enterprise that has the capability on a national level to do proper regulation of financial institutions is the U.S. government. And the Justice Department, as it was conceived and as it evolved over centuries of ethical, and the FBI as an elite agency of law enforcement, and the FTC and the CFPB now, and the expertise that has already been driven out of those places, and Lewis is getting the exceptions knocking on his door. The few good people that are willing to go down fighting, but so many thousands of excellent, experienced regulators are gone, and it's going to be impossible to replace them. June?
Yeah. I'd like to connect what Mark is saying with what Paul said earlier. Right now, when Republicans talk about corruption, they're talking about Somalis justifying the ICE invasion. When Democrats talk about corruption, they're either talking about Trump or they're talking about indicting ICE. But when you tie this together, there's a financial crash coming. We got wind of that with crypto. When that happens, ordinary people want to hang the people who rip them off. There is a window. You want to give them villains. You want to be a crusading prosecutor in that moment. And you then want to link it to your reform agenda, which includes rebuilding the Department of Justice and regulating all those folks in the Epstein class, not for the sex, but for the things that make them capable of getting away, perhaps in many cases, literally with murder, and to connect that to what is happening that Mark described for in ordinary Americans. We don't have that. We have Sherrod Brown, who should be a hero in this setting, losing the last election because of ads about trans people. This is nuts. We don't have the heroes the way you all have done this in earlier time periods, and we don't have the narrative that connects the Democratic Party and the champions that we should be behind to cleaning up the corruption that affects individual people. Those links are not there in the political discourse.
And by the way, those ads that you're talking about, June, replaced by crypto people.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yes. And did anybody call them? I didn't see them. Did anybody
Mhm.
the call the people placing the ads on the fact they were trying to steal the election to produce exactly what Donald Trump has given them? I don't see that. We know,
Because they
Amen.
were also the biggest funders on the Democratic side.
Right.
but to
Well,
Sherrod
But
Brown.
they had to get Sherrod Brown out of the
Not to
way.
share it, but
Yeah,
right.
because
Yeah.
if Democrats had held on to the Senate and which was a real possibility, and Sherrod had held on to his seat as the chair of the banking committee, they would have been regulated, or they would have not been deregulated in the way that's been done now. He was literally the last line of defense that existed, and thank God he's running again.
yeah.
And I think he's got an excellent chance of winning. He's outraged his opponent with no, and I can tell you he has no crypto money at all in his account. But the guy that the guy that beat Sherrod is a used car dealer, or a car dealer that had made his fortune, or his second fortune, in crypto. Bernie Marino, who's by the way who's an immigrant to this country, which makes his whole view absurd. I mean, who was, by the way, still this week encouraging ICE to come in, encouraging Trump to go ahead and end the temporary protective status for Haitians who are working hard in Springfield, Ohio. And who and was had the unbelievable uh, 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 intestinal fortitude to attack the court that halted that effort to end the legal protected status of Haitians who had been forced back to a country where they were literally at risk of their physical life. It's chaos there in Haiti right now. And at the expense of small business owners in Springfield, Ohio, who have who and the colleagues that work with those folks that are happy to have hardworking people who really are appreciative of their $20 an hour jobs to be here in the United States, rebuilding the manufacturing sector. It's just tragic. But look, I mean, look, we thought it was terrible when I ran in 2006 with George W. Bush. We thought he was an autocrat. We thought that he was impinging on people's civil rights. We thought he was unnecessarily engaged in wars outside the country. Man, what most people would give to have him back right now. But it was the wind from the frustration that ordinary Americans had with that lack of alignment with their priorities. And I think that's what's got to get communicated, is that this idea of destroying people don't care how many people work at the IRS. They just care that they get their tax return when they file, quickly after they file their return. And that maybe somebody at the CFPB will stop H&R Block from ripping them off with a tax return advance loan with usurious terms. But they don't care about this. They don't. That's not what they want. What they don't want is our young men and women in the military being put at risk in other countries and scary in places far away for reasons that they can't totally understand. And what they don't want is a government that's being operated for the benefit of the rich and powerful who are exploiting them every single day.
But
Yeah.
But
Go ahead. Go ahead, Paul.
Trump is purposely creating this shitstorm of everything else so we don't notice, right? How
Right,
many
right.
people even on this call know that the unemployment rate went up 2 points in January to 4.4? How many people on this call know that the employment, we only had created 20,000 jobs in January, right?
Mhm.
And so these numbers are horrific, but I missed all of that, right? I missed all that because he's flooding the zone. So, I think June's right. I think that ultimately the economic impact is going to hit people right on the nose and it's going to have an impact. But he's creating so much purposeful noise that we're missing some of these key economic indicators that really show we're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, and just one footnote for the lawyers that watch this podcast, and I've been talking to a few of them that I'm happy are listening and participating in, and what Patrick liking and sharing and whatever it is you want them to do. But the whatever the kids are doing now, do that. But that the chairman of Paul Weiss, um, uh,
Brad Karp.
Brad Karp, um, capitulates to Trump, takes a shit on the rule of law in front of all of his partners. And what does he get forced out for? Because he wrote some dirty emails to Epstein,
Epstein.
That were exposed in the dump of those files. Everything is upside. This is upside down time. I mean, lawyers need to understand the absolute crisis that we're in this country, and the requirement that each and every one of us stand up for the rule of law, and not to capitulate to a president that insists that lawyers do certain things, or take certain clients, or get rid of certain clients, in order to please him, and in a very direct way. That should have been all the reason in the world the partners of Paul Weiss needed to force him out. They lost a whole crop of potential associates for that firm. The long-term health of that firm, I think, is in grave danger.
Good.
But now's the time they decided it's time for him to go. I mean, it's like upside down time.
And well said, Mark. And Bill, I want to maybe give you the opportunity for the last word here.
So let me bring this together. It isn't that everybody is corrupt, right? That in these positions of power. It's just that I only need to get one law firm partner to give me the opinion, right? And I set people in competition and create a race to the bottom where there are such folks. So if you're running these scams, accounting is your weapon of choice, and you need to get it blessed. And in the private sector, that is always possible. Again, the success rate in liar's loans, 100% in getting AAA ratings from the top 3 credit rating agencies in the world. 100%. 100% success rate in getting clean opinions on your audited financials, right? Who do they fear? They fear real regulators because they can't fire us, right? Which is why Keating, by the way, tried so hard to get me fired and people like me. Who else do they fear? They hate real investigators and real prosecutors because they can't fire them either. And what else do they hate? Whistleblowers. Whistleblowers drive them crazier than anybody. They've been inside the tent. They know what's going on. They have all this coercive power. And whistleblowers, we're just plain weird, right? You can't figure us out. We do this stuff against our self-interest. And CEOs, that just blows their mind when they're fraudsters. And so as Mark and all of us have been putting together, and what Lewis told us today, is that they are systematically dismantling all of those things, including whistleblowing, because they want to do this with impunity. And as all of us have said today, behind this is, the saying I made kind of famous in the savings and loan debacle, that the highest return on assets was always a political contribution. And, and that's the point. And it's not good enough that, some Democrats are opposed. If a big chunk of the Democratic elected officials are hustling for crypto money, you're going to get a disaster. And that's precisely what we've gotten. And I would just say to Paul, it took 2.5 years and thousands of hours working with journalists, most of whom weren't worth the time. But eventually it became a huge thing politically, such that when we brought even a civil suit in which we would describe the fraudulent operations, we would put in the political contributions, right? And those politicians would rush after 2 years of drumbeat, rush to return those political contributions or donate them to charity. So, yeah, it's almost impossibly hard, but that's another reason they fear real regulators that are going to, as Lewis has just explained, we're there. We're there in the trenches. We work for years doing this stuff. It isn't just our spectacular moment as a whistleblower. They fear what? What Lewis just talked about. They hate competence and integrity. That combination and dedication to the public. That's why they hate us. That's why they fear us as whistleblowers, as competent investigators, as competent prosecutors.
And, guys, in closing, I feel like, I've been observing some nightmare horror story, right? Some Stephen King, whatever, or Dante's Inferno, or, some sort of Machiavellian, Michelangelo fresco. That's just like the worst of humanity that just we're surrounded by. And the only beam of light that I see is the group of people here that demonstrate week in and week out the competence, the track record, because you've been there, you've done it before successfully, and you can do it again. Bill, from the very beginning, has been calling for, we don't have to wait to win the elections and the midterms to be able to get subpoenas at state legislatures with whistleblowers right now, not to mention all sorts of different sorts of techniques that would, obviously expose those from the Department of Justice that are incompetent and lying in front of the Bar Association, among other things. So I would encourage everybody that's watching this, as always, please like, subscribe, and share. Please dig in further into everybody's work here on this panel, as well as understand that we have to create a galvanized, group of people that are like, this is insane. It is insane what we're in the midst of. I mean, we just to finish off on, I think, the integral piece of all of this stuff that everybody's paying attention to, I would encourage everybody to watch the interview between Steve Bannon and Epstein. The strangest, questions and this strange dialogue. But at the end, Bannon says, "Are you the devil?" to Epstein, and Epstein's kind of caught flat-footed because it's kind of a puff piece to kind of rehabilitate Epstein's reputation, because he had been arrested at that time for child molestation and that sort of thing. And Bannon asked him earlier in that interview, you had 2 calls when you were in prison. Who did you call? And he said, Jimmy Kane, the CEO of Bear Stearns, and I believe it was Jess Staley, who was, I think, second in line at JP Morgan Chase. And so, guys, the entire legal.
Those two are the highlights, what you just mentioned. Unless you like to self-immolate, it was a hard 2 hours watching 2 insane people talk to each other from my perspective.
Well, true. But the whole thing was, again, bad people do stupid things and bad stuff that these people on this panel have spent decades in the trenches putting cases together to thwart, these people from hurting everyday Americans. And I hope that those of you who are watching this understand that and can and please spread far and wide. To everybody on this panel, of course, Lewis Clark from the executive director of the Government Accountability Project, Mark Dan of Dan Law, William K. Black, University of Minnesota currently, Paul Peltier, George Washington University, and then, of course, June Carbone, University of Minnesota. My name is Patrick Lovell. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week. All the best. Onwards and upwards.